Okay, everyone, so this exercise is configuring multi-area OSPF version 3. So let's go ahead and just do the exercise. So we do have an addressing table as well with all the IPv6 addresses configured everywhere in the network. So let's have a look at the requirements. Now, scenario, we are going to configure multi-area OSPF version 3. The network is already connected and the interfaces are configured with IPv6 addressing. It's our job to enable multi-area OSPF version 3, verify the connectivity, and examine the operation of multi-area OSPF version 3. Now, once again, we're going to use the topology and the IP addressing table to determine which interfaces belong to specific areas. So let's go ahead. Now, the first part is enable IPv6 routing and configure OSPF version 3 on router A. So router A is this ABR right here, which is advertising networks to area 1 and area 0. So we're going to click on RA, CLI, and we're going to start doing the exercise. So just like I mentioned before to you guys, I'm going to uh, do a logging synchronous in the console just because I don't like to be interrupted by log messages when I'm typing the OSPF commands. So let's go ahead, line console 0, logging synchronous, and that's all we need. Now let's go ahead and start configuring OSPF version 3. So we do need to remember that when we're configuring OSPF version 3, the first thing that we need to make sure is that IPv6 unicast routing is enabled on all the routers that will be running OSPF version 3. So in order to do that, very simple command to enable IPv6 routing on a router, it's just a matter of typing in IPv6 unicast routing. And that's all we need. Now we have IPv6 unicast routing enabled on router A. Now that we have now that we have IPv6 routing enabled on router A, we can then move on to start configuring OSPF version 3. To configure OSPF version 3, what do we need to do? So if you remember in IPv4, we had to type it in router, OSPF, and then the process ID. Having said that, what is the command for OSPF version 3? Does anyone know? Yes? It's going to be IPv6, router. Then what are the options when we're configuring routing protocols for IPv6 in Packet Tracer? They are EIGRP, because we can then configure EIGRP for IPv6, OSPF version 3, and RIP for IPv6, RIP v6. Sometimes RIP v6 is also called RIP ng as well. Now let's go ahead and start configuring OSPF version 3. So IPv6 router OSPF, and then we're gonna have to type it in the process ID again. Just gonna go with 1, should be enough. Okay, we're gonna get a message. OSPF v3 process 1 could not pick a router ID. Please configure it manually. Now, as opposed to router OSPF version 2, we are configuring OSPF version 2 to advertise IPv4 networks. So even if we don't specify the router ID, OSPF is going to be able to pick a router ID automatically based on the loopback interfaces and physical interfaces. It is going to choose the highest IP. Now, because we don't have any IPv4 interface on this router, we have to configure the router ID manually, otherwise it's just simply not going to work. And how do we do that? With the command router ID, and then we type it in. For router A, the router ID is 1111. And we are pretty much done assigning the router ID. Our next step, so configure OSPF v3 on RA with process ID 1 and router ID of all ones. and advertise each directly connected network in OSPF version 3 on RA. So if we do remember that OSPF v3 does not have the network command, we have to go into each interface and enable OSPF version 3 on an interface by interface basis. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. I'm going to exit my router configuration. And then we are able to go to the interface and assign the interface to OSPF version 3. I'm going to go interface. What are the interfaces we need to advertise in RA? They are all of these three. There's no need to advertise link logo. I don't see any need for that. So we're going to advertise these networks. So interface gig 00. And then we're going to type it in. How do we advertise the network associated to the interface? Anybody remember how to do that? It's okay if we don't remember. We can just try to figure it out. So IPv6 question mark. So IPv6, so probably it's going to be under IPv6 OSPF because we want to assign the interface to OSPF. So probably going to be IP OSPF. And then what else we have to specify? We have to specify the process ID that this interface is going to be associated with, which is 1. And then we have to specify the area keyword and the area number. So for this specific interface, which is interface gig 00 of router 1, it is in area 1. All right. So we're going to type it in area 1. That's it. We have now associated this interface to OSPF version 3. And now we can move on to do the same for the other two interfaces. So interface gig 01, IPv6 OSPF 1 area, and the area is 1 as well. And now we can do the same for the serial interface. IPv6 OSPF 1 area 0 this time, and we are done. Okay. So router A has been configured. We are done with router A. Let's see what are the other requirements. Now we have to configure both RB and RC. Now that you guys know the commands, if you're watching this video, pause the video and try to do it yourself. Now, for the guys that are here in the class, in the live lecture, I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes and then I'm going to do it as well. All right, guys, welcome back. Let's finish this activity now. So let's go now into router B and finish the configuration necessary to activate OSPF version 3. So I'm going to go router B. Just like I said before, I don't like to be interrupted by the log messages saying that the adjacency has been formed. So once again, I'm going to go to the line console and do a logging synchronous. And then we're now able to do the exercise. So let's go ahead, and the first step we need to do on a router to activate OSPF version 3 is to make sure that IPv6 routing is enabled. How do we do that? With the command IPv6 unicast routing. Done. Our next step is to start the OSPF version 3 process. So we do that with the IPv6 router OSPF and then the process ID, which is 1. And then, like we already discussed, we have to assign it manually the router ID. That is because if we don't, the router won't be able to assign itself because it doesn't have any IPv4 interface. So we do that with the router ID command. For router B, it has to be 2.2.2.2. And that's all we need to do to start the OSPF v3 process. Now, if we go back, we need to activate OSPF version 3 on an interface by interface basis. So we have to go to each one of the interfaces and activate them. So what are the interfaces of router B that we need to advertise? They are the gig 00 and the serial 000 and 001. Let's do it one by one. So interface gig 00, they all belong to area 0. So IPv6 OSPF1 area 0, and that will do the job for the first interface. We're going to do the same for the other two interfaces. So interface serial all zeros, IPv6 OSPF1 area 0, and now the other interface 001 IPv6 OSPF1 area 0. Now we are done with router B. We don't have to do anything else in router B. Now we're just left with router C configuration. Let's move on to router C. Once again, I don't like to see the messages interrupting me all the time. Now I'm going to go to the line console. And for this one, I don't need to see the log messages at all. So I'm going to do no login console so that they won't even show up when I'm typing the commands. And now we can start configuring OSPF version 3. First step, make sure IPv6 unicast routing is enabled. Second step, initiate OSPF version 3, IPv6 router OSPF1. Next step, assign the router ID. For router C, it's all threes, 3333. And then we have to activate OSPF version 3 on an interface by interface basis. So for router C, the interfaces that are part of the OSPF process, they are the gigabit interfaces, which belong to area 2, and the serial interface, which belongs to area 0. We're going to do just that. So we're going to go router C and interface gig 00 IPv6 OSPF1 area 2. Do the same for interface gig 01 IPv6 OSPF1 area 2 also. And then, last but not the least, the serial interface. Serial interface 001 IPv6 OSPF1 area 0 for the serial interface. And please note that this time I didn't get any log messages, any notifications, except this one, which was just to warn me about the router ID thing. But I didn't get any message saying that the adjacency has been formed, even though it was. And how do we check that it was? Do show IPv6 OSPF neighbors will show it to us that we have formed adjacency with other routers. Cool, we are done with the configuration. As we can clearly see, we have reached 100% completion. Now let's investigate what we have just done. I'm going to go to router A first. And we're going to type it in. Do show IPv6 route this time to verify the IPv6 routing table. And as we can clearly see here, we do have the OSPF learned routes. So these two here in router A's perspective, they are being learned from area 0. And because router A also belongs to area 0, they are intra-area OSPF. We do have some OI. Now, in the IPv6 routing table, the OI, they mean the same as the OIA in the IPv4 routing table. They are the routes learned from outside of the areas that the router belongs to. So router A is advertising to area 1 and area 0. But these two routes here, they are learned because router C is advertising them and router A is not in area 2. Once again, administrative distance and metric, which in this case is the cost. And that's all we need to make sure it works. Cool. All right, so activity done.